We're back for another week on the D3 Datacast. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us once again. If you've been a longtime listener or viewer, thank you. We're glad to have you here. Hopefully, you've already clicked the subscribe button. If you're new, thank you for joining us. Try us out, see what you think. And if you feel like we have something to add to your enjoyment of the Division III basketball scene, please consider clicking the subscribe button and ring the bell, the little notification bell, so that you are alerted every Monday when we post a new episode. Now, Matt, as we're looking back to last week, I don't think we can really start to talk about last week without the big game at John Carroll, Mount Union, John Carroll playing at the top of the OAC. And it was a game between teams that one you had highly ranked and one you were not yet ranking. So let's just get right into your top 25, Matt. The question the nation is looking to see what's happening now. Are you finally ranking John Carroll?
I am. I finally broke down, and John Carroll will re-enter my ballot this week. I was voting for them. I think starting maybe in week 2, I had them. I think I had them as high as maybe 9. They had an early season win against Wheaton that was very impressive, and then they lost to like UW Superior. They had some really close games against some maybe less than competition, and I dropped them out for a while. I maybe held them out too long. I bring them back in all the way up at number 16. It's probably a lot lower than even some other people have them. But John Carroll back solidly in the middle of my ballot, and they're playing well. They look good. They've gotten the result at Mount Union against Mount Union this last week, and that was good to see for them. And I think they're looking good for March. They might be in position to host a pod. I don't think they're guaranteed at any in any stretch of the imagination right now, but I think they're in the mix right there, especially needing more hosts in the kind of the Western portion. We're going to count John Carroll as Western for the sake of that discussion. So they're looking good there. They look good this week. Great result against Mount Union. So yeah, happy for the Blue Streaks.
Any other highlights in your top 25 ballot as you're putting it together that you want to mention?
Yes, I did make the switch at the top this week. Randolph Macon goes back into the number 1 spot. I had St. Joseph there for 6 weeks. After initially voting for Randolph Macon, then Randolph Macon tripped up a little bit early on, and I had UW La Crosse for a couple of weeks, and then St. Joseph took over for 6 weeks, but now I made the switch back to Randolph Macon. Not really because of anything St. Joseph did. They've had maybe a couple of tight results. They had a game against LaSalle this week that was very close into the last couple of minutes. But Randolph Macon's just been steamrolling their competition largely, and they've been playing in the ODAC, who's really strong this year. So Randolph Macon, it's been more the impressive play of Randolph Macon that has pushed me over the edge. Not that St. Joseph has really done much to lose ground there.
And I love kind of the back half of the middle there. You've got Wash U, Emory, and Rochester all in a row. It really strikes me as hey, the UAA is good. Let's just throw a bunch of UAA teams right here all in a row because who knows who's really better than the rest, right?
It's a little bit like, and this is the UAA part where you just like, this is all the teams. They're going to sort themselves out. I don't know. That was maybe a little bit of a cop out. I felt that way when I was putting it together. Um, Wash U for me has been this yo-yo where they're in the teens, then they have a week where they don't look good, and then they're out, and then they're back in the teens. This last week they looked as good as anyone in that conference. It's a really strong conference. It's probably the best conference in Division III. So they look like the leaders right now. Emory and Rochester, both good teams. I think they're right there. I think they're top 25 worthy. So in some order, I think the UAA kind of 18 through 20 makes sense to me. But I don't think there's a lot separating them. I think this is going to be a really fascinating conference race to watch. It's kind of fun on Sundays. There's very few games, but you know you're going to have 4 good UAA games on any given Sunday. So they're still sorting themselves out. I don't know if we'll see separation from here on out, or if it's going to continue to be this sort of like we're all pretty good. We can all lose to anyone. We can all beat anyone kind of a thing. And maybe that's okay.
And then another team I think we need to shout out here coming in at number 24 on your ballot this week is North Park. They got the Wednesday big win against Wheaton, which, Wheaton highly ranked 6th on your ballot here again this week. So just a big resume win, but also in terms of the regular season race in the CCIW, a Wheaton win there would have given them a 2-game lead at the top of the standings, which would really be like a 3-game lead because it would have given them the season sweep over North Park. So even closing the 2 game gap wouldn't be enough for North Park to move into a tie because Wheaton would have swept them. But instead, North Park gets the win, evens the season series, and then evens the total conference record at the top. With those two really having emerged from the rest of the CCIW pack.
Yeah.
So I think the two of them have a 2 game lead now.
Yeah, I think it's clear to me, as you said, they're the two top teams in the CCIW. It felt weird most of the season only having one CCIW in the top 25 for me. I think North Park entering feels pretty good, and I think that also shows the gap being very narrow between number 6 and 24. We saw those two teams split their season series. I think both of them were single digit margins. If you went total point differential, I think Wheaton still comes out a little bit on top, if I have that correct. But there between numbers 6 and number 24, as you know, these teams are all relatively squished together in the middle, I think. Um, and we've seen that in the court between these two teams in what's a really good conference there.
And then also just there creates a natural breakpoint with you're either in the top 25 or you're out. So you might be 26, but you're not listed here, and that can create a perception that maybe there's a larger gap, like you mentioned from 6 to 25, but really that extends beyond the reach of the top 25 poll. You might be talking about teams from like 10 to 40
Yeah.
are actually pretty close in quality, and really any of those could be ranked in maybe not quite any order, but would all be worthy of consideration.
Yeah, there's a lot of teams that didn't make my ballot that I wouldn't really have any argument being in the top 25. And I think we'll see that in March when we get to the tournament. There's going to be teams that are beating these teams. There are teams on my ballot right now that might be on the bubble that might not make the tournament because just the way the NCAA selection process goes. And then the teams that do make the tournament, there could be a team that I see more as like a 40 or 50 that gets to the Sweet 16 because, again, that gap is so narrow, I think, this year.
So speaking of the NCAA tournament, let's talk bubbles, because I think the bubble is starting to take shape, at least in terms of some tiers, and maybe we can whittle it down a little bit to maybe not who's so safe or looking good, but kind of those teams that have put themselves into position or could be on the fringes of being in position, depending on what else shakes out here. Still, obviously, a lot of games yet to be played, a lot to be determined. There's room for movement, and obviously, the message to all teams is the same. Number one, win your league, win your auto bid. Right? That's the name of the game. And then 2 is, even if you are in good position now, like, everyone just needs to keep winning.
Mhm.
So those are kind of the basis. Like, yes, we understand everyone needs to keep winning, but beyond that, Matt, let's kind of go through how we see the bubble starting to take shape as we are really going to be just a week away from regional ranking
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, 1 week from the first regional rankings and 4 weeks left until Selection Monday when this episode drops. So about 1 month left for teams to bolster their resume, to make their case for their at-large bids. But as you said, win your Pool A. There's only 20 at-large bids, 44 automatic qualifiers, less than one half of a bid per conference. So you've got to win your Pool A to feel safe. There's very few teams that will feel safe without that. And I think those teams are mostly on this list right here. So as we look at the way the bubble's shaping up, these are the teams that are, I'm going to call them nearly locks. Again, this is using the data that I run and also relying, as always, heavily on the work of Drew Pasteur at D3Bubble on Twitter. He puts together, he has a collection of data on his site. So I kind of mashed the two together and relied a little bit more on his than mine at times. And I came up with this list. So these are the teams, I'm going to call them nearly locks. And these are teams that can go essentially into coast mode down the stretch here and probably not lose all of their games. But, if they're winning even half their games left, they're all feeling pretty good. Actually, I think Drew tweeted out that Randolph-Macon is maybe the first true lock of the season. He thought that they could lose out and still be safe. But I don't think any coach out there wants to hear their team going into coast mode. But Randolph-Macon, St. Joseph, Connecticut, Middlebury, Swarthmore, St. Thomas, Mount Union, Rowan, Stockton, Christopher Newport, Wheaton, Hampton, Sydney, Rochester. These are all teams that if they just kind of stay on track and go 500 from here on out. Essentially, I think they're probably going to be looking good to be selected. And the way my little tables here are working out. You can see the team, their conference, their winning percentage, their strength of schedule, their results versus regionally ranked opponents. Those are 3 of the 5 primary criteria. Obviously, we don't have official regional rankings yet, so we don't have any regionally ranked opponent results. So those are the to-date numbers. Then I have projected columns on the far right. I hope it shows up well on YouTube on your little screens. That's using my efficiency ratings, their remaining schedule, not including conference tournaments, so any scheduled games, and then what that projects their strength of schedule to be, wins of teams projected to be in my regional ranking. So it's a little bit fuzzy there, but looking forward to the end of the season, what might their resume be? So when I'm going through these lists, it's a little bit of a mix between their current resume and their projected resume as I'm coming up. But these are the only teams that can feel safe. I came up with 12. That's actually maybe a little high. You could maybe argue a few of these teams are maybe slightly more bubbly, maybe below Christopher Newport. They're a little slightly more bubbly, but these teams should feel pretty good. I would be surprised if any of these teams don't make it at the end of the day.
Yeah, so to put it in a little bit more coach-friendly terms, they won't like to hear things like coast mode or talking about losing out or things like that. But these are the teams that truly do have some margin for error, right? Like this is they can lose a couple of games and their winning percentage is already at a point where they can absorb that hit. Now, as you look here, both in terms of where these teams stand in currently in terms of winning percentage, strength of schedule numbers, and then also the projected winning percentage and strength of schedule numbers. Like people who have followed this for a long time will recognize these numbers across the board as being very solid. I know there's going to be some differences this year with far fewer teams being ranked in the total of the regionally ranked wins that are just available by virtue of there being fewer teams in the regional rankings. But here you still see numbers for the most part kind of in the 5 to 7 range. Um, and then in this list, just looking, the only sub 800 winning percentage or projected number that gets a little bit suspect would be Rochester with a 717 projected winning percentage. But you look, the projected SOS is just so far above even normal elite status, and then projecting them for 10 regionally ranked wins is just crazy. So that takes what is maybe a more pedestrian 717 winning percentage and puts it way over the top, where kind of puts them in the category of these other teams here.
Yeah, exactly. Even though that winning percentage might be getting into suspect territory, the other criteria overwhelms that. And I should say this whole exercise, you can see the national rank column there that I actually meant to delete out. That was just to help me organize my thoughts. This whole thing should be thought of as directional. The order isn't so important. These are kind of groups of teams that are roughly in some sort of a gradient order. But if you want to like reorganize these teams, that's fine. So as we go through the list, kind of keep that in mind. I didn't go through a whole selection process as we go here. But yeah, these are all the teams that have stellar criteria across the board, or 2 out of 3 overwhelming, and they're going to feel pretty good.
And these also start to be the teams that you want to see if you're a fan of a bubble team, a true bubble team. These are some of the teams that you want to see winning their conference tournament. Now,
yes.
in the case of the NJAC, you see Rowan and Stockton right next to each other there. So that sets up a little bit of a or situation based on the numbers so far and what's being projected. We expect Rowan and Stockton to both be very comfortably in the field. So that's at least one Pool C bid out of the NJAC. At the end of the bubble, all that really matters is at least one of those teams ending up in Pool A.
Exactly. Yeah, a bunch of these teams are going to win their Pool A. A bunch of them are conference leaders right now that I'm showing projected as a Pool A. But if Mount Union doesn't win the OAC because John Carroll did, then that's not really a bid thief. We're going to see John Carroll maybe on the next slide here. If St. Thomas doesn't win the SCAC, Trinity does, then that's probably a bid thief because they're not going to be on this list for a few more slides. So very important for these bubble teams to know who's winning. ODAC can go maybe 2 or 3 deep and not really have a bid thief. The GNAC, St. Joseph's got to win it, or it's automatic bid thief right there. So we might only have 4 Pool C teams from these locks because the rest could win their Pool A's because they'll all be strong favorites in their conference, or favorites in their conference. But yeah, if upsets start to happen, then we start losing bids from the backside of this bubble.
So this group has the most margin for error, but there's the next group that still has maybe some margin for error, but as we noted at the top, keep winning.
Yep. So I'm calling these folks looking good. They don't want to take their foot off the gas. They maybe could improve their resume a little bit, or just make sure it's at least maintained. They probably want to winning, 2/3 of their remaining games if you want to put a number on it. But again, I didn't make that a thing. So teams that are looking good: Oswego State, Johns Hopkins, John Carroll, Emory, Keene State, Williams, Wash U, UW Oshkosh, and Guilford. These are all teams that have put together a resume that looks strong. If they continue in this direction, they should have no trouble getting in. But as you can see, both in the current resumes and the projected resumes, we start to lose some impressive looking numbers. The regionally ranked wins, in particular, are a little bit lower. Some of the strength of schedules, flirt with that kind of Mendoza line. Like if you look at Keene State, currently a 513 strength of schedule, projected 515 strength of schedule. That can get a little borderline, but their winning percentage above 900 can help them out there. Wash U's winning percentage gets a little low, but at this point in the process, 6 regionally ranked wins could look really strong. So good resumes here. These teams are going to want to keep going. Maybe a couple of these teams are fairly safe, and maybe a couple of the other fairly safe teams are just looking good. But relatively speaking, these teams are strong contenders for Pool C should they need it. And I think this is 21 total teams. We probably won't get enough. That would be like every single bid thief ever would need to happen, and you would still get through this list. So right now we're not in the danger zone yet.
And a lot of conferences here we're seeing listed for a second time, right? We got Johns Hopkins joins, like we saw in the first slide, with SWAT. John Carroll in the OAC. Another UAA with Emory. Williams, the second NESCAC team listed. Another UAA with Wash U. And then Guilford out of the ODAC. So really, these are the conferences where they're setting up those or situations where if you're on the bubble,
Yep.
as long as this team or that team wins the conference tournament, you're feeling okay.
Yep. So through these 21 spots, I think we've had 7 teams who are currently in projected Pool C position coming off the board. So maybe 13 Pool C to go as we're looking to the next group, which I'm calling Bubble In. So these are teams that at this point, we're still 4 weeks out, plenty time to improve the resume. But these are teams that they want to do as much as they can in the regular season, and they're still going to enter their conference tournament with the mindset of, we really want to win this because we don't want to be sweating it out on the bubble. And teams at the top of this list like Mary Hardin Baylor and UW La Crosse might be sweating less than a team like Case Western Reserve or Pomona Pitzer at the bottom of this list, but still, you've got work left to do to feel pretty good here. So these teams are Mary Hardin Baylor, Wisconsin La Crosse, Claremont Mudscripts, Utica, Montclair State, Worcester, NYU, North Park, Tufts, Mary Washington, Case Western Reserve, and Pomona Pitzer. A bunch of these are Pool C. I think this took us down to 16 or 17 of the projected Pool C spots. So I actually maybe even included 1 or 2 more teams. I kind of wanted to go in picking 15, counting on 4 or 5 bid thieves. I kind of picked 17. So I'm kind of stretching the definition of bubble in a little bit here. But these are after this, the teams below this, you've got to win your Pool A, and these teams still have work to do to be feeling good about any of this.
Right. As long as there's not a crazy amount of carnage in conference tournaments, these are the teams that are sitting okay. They don't necessarily need a big shakeup in the picture that we're seeing right now. Like the teams that are going to be on the next slide, they're not out of it, but they're going to need some help, right? They're going to need some other results to go their way, maybe talking about running the table or winning more games than they would be projected to win. But these are the teams that, as long as the landscape kind of holds and there's not too many bid thieves, then they could be okay.
Yep. And we are getting into the point in the whole process where there can be difference of opinion. Like you look at Utica out of the Empire 8, their projected resume of 855, 515, three regionally ranked wins. You know, you don't really want to sit on the bubble with that resume on Selection Monday. And I think you probably get in with that resume, and they're on this list because I think they're probably in. But we could sit here and have a discussion about is that really the case or not? And we'd have to do the whole process with all the teams and everything. But that's, your winning percentage is going to stack up with other teams from a lot of other regions that might still be on the board, like a Calvin, who's on the next slide. Um, and you have a 516 strength of schedule, and, that's not great. It's okay. It's fine. It's not going to be automatically disqualifying, but most Pool C teams have a higher strength of schedule, and three regionally ranked wins is probably good, but is it overwhelming? I don't know. So you're kind of sitting there with maybe a middling resume, and you're kind of thinking, hey, we don't stand out on anything, and those are teams that can maybe sit on the bubble for longer than is comfortable. Probably get in with that resume, but again, you want to spend now these last 4 weeks just taking care of business and win that Empire 8 tournament, because if you're Utica, you don't want to be sitting there with that.
Yeah, and it's important to know, you kind of touched on it here. We're getting into the territory here where it's going to be really dependent on how the actual regional rankings
Yes,
shake
yes,
out,
yes, yes.
because we can look at a list like this and look across the winning percentages and the strength of schedules, but it's important to remember, as we talked about in previous episodes, and we'll get into future episodes as we actually go through the process of making like mock selections, but
Yeah.
for actual tournament selection time, only 10 teams are considered at a time, one from each region. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
we talk about being on the board, right? It's just whoever is the top team left in each region is up for consideration at a time. So it's dependent on you being higher ranked the higher ranked you are in your region, the faster you could potentially get to that board. Um, but then at that point, you just have to be competitive with the other 9 teams across all the other regions. So it can be a little bit different to look at a whole list like this, and it's a lot samey. But I know, having gone through the process last year, Matt, like we did, and
Mm-hmm.
behind the scenes, and you guys did on Hoopsville, like it actually looks a lot different once you can boil it
Yeah.
down to, okay, this is the team up for consideration in
Yeah.
Region 1 and Region 2 and across the board. And at that point, things start to peak out, uh, stick out a little bit more. But that doesn't help you if you're stuck behind someone. Like, you got to have your opportunity to get to the board.
Yeah. It is interesting how that works. A team doesn't stick out when you just look at a national list of 40 teams, maybe. But then when you take out the pool A's and you look at just the top one from each region and you start making picks, all of a sudden it's obvious that La Crosse is maybe way more qualified than Utica, let's say, just to pick that same team that I was looking at. And it's maybe harder to do when you're just looking at a list of numbers. So that's a very important distinction that I did not make here. I did not go through the actual process, and I just kind of ordered numbers off of a list here. Very much this bubble in and my next slide bubble out is a difference, could be a matter of opinion. I think my first two slides were more like, yes, these two, we might not agree on the exact order, but all of these teams are probably in the more likely in case. You can quibble with quite a bit of this, more than like the 1 or 2 hours I spent kind of on show prep today. So, and that's the process we're going to go through over the next 4 weeks. With regional rankings, we're going to see what the committee is valuing. We're going to get, like, week after week, we'll probably get that kind of cemented in, so that way we'll go into the final selections with some degree of confidence of what that order is, so then we can be comparing those teams to their correct region.
And we also start to see some interesting things in terms of the way teams are trending right now. Like on this list, to me, what stick out are NYU, and then to some extent Case Western
Yeah.
Reserve, both of them UAA teams that loaded up on wins in the non-conference with kind of suspect to soft non-conference schedules. Now, having the benefit of a UAA schedule, in the end, you can see they have, uh, especially in NYU's case, um, a good projected SOS, but both of them have started to take some losses,
Mm-hmm.
especially NYU. And so currently sitting at a 722, that 704 projected winning percentage may be a little uh, a little on the high side for NYU the way things have gone, at least through the first
Yeah.
half of UAA play. So there's definitely some trending in play here that could help teams, maybe that are a little bit more at the bottom end of bubble in or bubble out, and then uh, some that will be hurt by it.
Yeah, that's important to note. My projected values are based on the efficiency ratings. My computer still really likes NYU more than I do as a human voter. So I would personally expect that winning percentage to be lower than is shown on the screen here. 583 is still a good strength of schedule, but we're talking about a winning percentage in the 670 range. Could that make a big difference? We'll have to see. But you're absolutely right. Teams that might take more losses than expected down the stretch because their schedule is more difficult, or they happen to lose a game or two, could be more adversely impacted by this than some other teams. All right, getting to the next slide. Teams that I think are bubble out right now. These are teams that definitely want to win their conference tournament. If they're going to count on a pool C, you want to think about losing like 0 or 1 game down the stretch up until your conference tournament. You want to get to your conference tournament final, give yourself every chance, and then at the end of the day, even if you do all that, you might not make it. So, like I said, I think we had taken 17 projected pool Cs off the board in our first 3 slides. That was anticipating, counting on 0 bid thieves, which there's going to be. So we might be out of bids at this point. So these teams definitely want to try to jump those other teams, do everything they can to get those wins. If it's a regionally ranked win, that's even better. But definitely go in with the mindset of winning your conference tournament, as all teams should. But these kind of bubble out teams right now look like Trinity, Connecticut, WPI, Catholic, Nazareth, Barry, Roanoke, Wabash, Redlands, DeSales, Calvin, Alvernia, Amherst, Washington and Lee, Heidelberg, UW Eau Claire, East Texas Baptist, Texas Dallas. I think there's some chance here of a bubble position. A team like Trinity or WPI might have a good chance of one of those still, like 25, 30, 40% chance of getting one of those teams toward the bottom, like DeSales, Calvin, Alvernia on down. That might only be like a 10% chance if things go right. And it's gonna make a big difference on things that happen around you. Take Calvin, for instance. It's showing 3 regionally ranked wins. That's something that might get them to the conversation, to the table, if they're 841, if their strength of schedule increases through the conference tournament a little bit, 3 regionally ranked wins. That's going to probably depend heavily on if Trine gets regionally ranked, because this is kind of expecting that Calvin has a win or two over Trine. If Trine doesn't get regionally ranked and Calvin ends up with just the one regionally ranked win against UW Oshkosh in their first Division III game of the season, that's probably just enough as it is. Low 500 strength of schedule, one regionally ranked win. That's probably not a conversation. They're just not going to get the pool C. So very dependent on who might be on your schedule already that sneaks into the regional rankings around the country. That can really bolster a resume. So yeah, collecting those regionally ranked wins, keeping that strength of schedule up, winning every game you can, and probably still just at the end of the day counting on winning your pool C. That's what these teams are going to do.
Yeah, these teams might not even want to be seeing upsets in their conference tournaments up until a championship game so that they can get the added
Yeah,
benefit
right.
of an SOS boost against the best possible team in their conference, as opposed to, maybe one of those, bottom feeder Cinderella stories who makes a run to the conference title game, um,
You
and
got to beat them.
pulls off the big upset, and then suddenly, you're needing a pool
Yeah,
C, and you don't even have a high SOS team getting
right.
added to the mix.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you want to get all those opportunities for strength of schedule, and really you just got to win your pool A. These teams are really going to have to win their pool A. A couple of them will just because things happen, right? In basketball, 4 weeks of ball, it's a long time. So some of these will probably maybe come into the slide above the earlier slide because they had been successful. You could see like Trinity goes on a NESCAC run and gets themselves in a good position. Fine, WPI could do the same in the new MAC. That's fine, but you take a loss or two. Maybe not fine. We're also getting into the range of like Catholic. Does their strength of schedule get above 500 or does it stay below 500? That could make a big difference. We've seen like I forget what the actual lowest is. I think like 514 or something. We've seen around that get into the tournament. There might have been something in like the 50 somethings. We haven't seen a point four anything. I think maybe one time like 10 years ago. I don't know the exact history, but it's just a psychological difference of a 0.48 versus a 0.502. Just being on the right side of 500 could help. So, what's the strength of schedule going to be there for Catholic? The 922 projected winning percentage looks great, but will the committee accept that or not? I don't know. And our final slide is the slide you don't want to be on, and I think this is just like a definite go ahead and win your pool A. I'm sorry, this type gets really small. We get all the way down to I think my top 66 teams here. I'll just read them off: Brockport, Wesleyan, Carnegie Mellon, Western Connecticut, Illinois College, Trine, Bethany Lutheran, Carleton, Western New England, Hamilton, Brandeis, Trinity, Texas, Central, Alfred, Cortland, Nichols, Maryville, North Carolina Wesleyan, Kane, Colby. I just don't really see the resumes here shaping up that these teams are going to really have much of a Pool C chance. Again, not leaving out the chance of like Kane just like winning out in the NJAC and getting to the final and losing. Like, okay, maybe that can get them in there. Um, but again, like that's a strong conference with a lot of good teams. So it's unlikely that you could probably get through. I don't know their exact schedule, but get through that unscathed. Illinois College, I just don't see the strength of the schedule being ever competitive for Pool C. Trine, probably the same, honestly. Maybe they get into the MIAA tournament and they play Hope and Calvin, and that strength of schedule can get further up to 500, and who knows. But I just where it's sitting right there at 485, I don't think that's likely. Brandeis has been competitive in the UAA. It's a really strong conference. I think they're a good team. I think that strength of schedule is really good, but I don't know that they're going to get the winning percentage even up to 0.65. And if I think at some point you're just too low to be considered. And I think that might be the case for them, and that might be similar for Carnegie Mellon. I think from where they're at right now, if they go on a strong run in the UAA, they can get themselves into position to be ranked in Region 7 and to be in the conversation for Pool C. But that's a tough conference. And again, if you're at that projected winning percentage of 608, even though you've got regionally ranked wins and you've got a strong strength of schedule, I just don't see the committee considering you for a Pool C spot at that position.
Yeah, and like you said, there's a lot of teams on this list that you could see making a run. Even if it's not a run to make themselves more of a bubble in type team, but making a run to secure their pool A. Like no one's counting out trying in the MIAA, even if
Yeah,
the resume is not going to be where it needs to be for a pool C if they fall short. Um, but like you talked about, like maybe Kane goes on a run, but these are the teams that there's something to work with there in terms of a resume, but it's really to to put themselves more in position, they're going to have to go beyond the projection
yeah,
or the kind of the rate of winning that they've had so far. Like something's going to need to happen outside of what has happened so far, whether that's help from somewhere else or especially going on a run here to really
yeah.
improve that winning percentage.
Yep. Yeah, if these teams want to get in, they, like we said at the previous slide, they have to do something extraordinary down the stretch, and even then, it might not be enough for the Pool C. So for some of them it would be, for some of them it wouldn't be. So definitely win your Pool A if you're these teams, and if you're a team that we have not named so far, fall under one of two scenarios. One, I missed your name on the list, and I apologize. Two, you just got to win the Pool A as well. Hopefully, get into your conference tournament if you're a conference that doesn't have everyone make it, and win the Pool A, and that's how you're going to get in.
And Wesleyan was one that I shouted out on Twitter at the start of the weekend because as we were looking at some lists, Wesleyan was popping up there, and they entered the season with a lot of pretty high expectations. I believe they were in the top 25. I don't remember where they were in the initial top 25, but they came out of the gate and they were really one of the more disappointing teams of the season, starting 2-5. And the fact that they'd played themselves back into tournament consideration was is really impressive. Of course, then they are now coming off an 0-2 weekend, but so that doesn't look quite as good as it did at the start of the weekend. But here, still on your list at number 50.
Yeah, I think that they in particular are a team that if they go on a run and can win out, let's say, then I think they could be in Pool C position. It's going to be tough for them. They still have Middlebury, Williams, and Tufts as their next 3 games. If they win all those, that might be 3 regionally ranked wins, and that'll go solidly in their favor. And then they finish off with Bates. They have 4 more games until the NESCAC tournament. You win a game or two in the NESCAC tournament. Maybe you get a regionally ranked win in there. Maybe we're talking that Wesleyan has a high 600s winning percentage with one of those elite strength of schedules and some regionally ranked wins. And then, maybe they've gotten themselves into that bubble in kind of conversation somewhere. But getting through Middlebury, Williams, and Tufts is going to be something of a stretch. I think not
And it will
impossible.
also depend on how the Region One rankings stack up, where they're
Yep.
placed in that. As we expect right now, it's going to be basically St. Joseph and
And the
take your
NESCACs.
picks of your 5 favorite NESCAC teams.
Yeah.
That's the really dominating Region One. But it's where are they going to get placed in that mix?
Yep. But you could see them, losing all those 3 games and finishing the season 1-4 maybe, and that just their winning percentage being in the low 600s. I think that's just kind of like a disqualifying line. At least we've sort of seen that in the past around that 650 range, below which they don't really want to consider teams. So that's going to be kind of the trick for them: is do they get high enough to even be considered? All right,
Here we
that
go.
is
The
that
bubble
is bubble
picture.
talk.
That's the bubble.
That's how the bubble's shaping up. Still a lot of time. I know 4 weeks is really early. We haven't seen our first regional rankings yet. For another week, we won't see those. So this isn't a firm bubble. This is just how things are looking right now and how teams are feeling. If you're not on that first 2 slides, there's going to be a lot of turbulence in these rankings. And the next 2 weeks, maybe we'll look up and Brockport has moved themselves into bubble out, and then maybe they do a little more work and they're going to be bubble in. Who knows? So there's a lot of stuff that can change, but this is the way things are shaping up right now. The further you are down these slides, the more extraordinary you're going to want your finish to be to work yourself back into position. Like I've mentioned, D3 bubble, Drew Pasteur's work. I think at this point last year, if I'm not mistaken, Calvin's Pool C chances were around 10%. They kept playing strong and they kept playing strong, kept playing strong. They got themselves into a position where his numbers were saying about 50-50, on the Saturday, Sunday before Selection Monday. There were few bid thieves and they got a Pool C bid. So these teams that look like low chances right now, things can still happen in the last 4 weeks. Obviously, nothing is set in stone right now. That's why they play the games. And we have got a great stretch run of basketball, I think, coming up in front of us.
Now, Matt, I'm wondering how you would characterize where you would rather be at this point. You could put kind of the bubbly teams into one of 2 categories, right? Where they've got the maybe solid winning percentage, low SOS, or maybe the winning percentage isn't quite where it should be or needs to be, but they have a good SOS. So give me your take on where you would rather be if you had to be one of those 2.
It's tough to say for sure because it always depends, and there's a range, a gradient of all these things. I would almost rather have the strength of schedule down because that's something that I think that's a little bit hard to. You can't control that what's on your schedule for your last whatever it is 4, 5, 6 games left in the regular season, then conference tournament. But if you have the strength of schedule, then you can at least say, who says we can't go 6-0 to finish the regular season and then get into our conference tournament? And maybe that puts your winning percentage high enough. It just feels at least like that's more in your control. So I would rather have the strength of schedule in the bag right now, maybe a couple of regional ranked wins behind me, and then going in to know like I just need to execute, take care of business. That's what I would prefer.
Yeah, I would agree with you. It seems like that's the situation where you have a little bit more upside in your bubble situation, whereas if you're a high winning percentage, low SOS team, you have more downside in your bubble situation.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Yeah, because each game you lose from here on out, it just absolutely destroys you. Again, I look at Drew's numbers. He has a handy tab on his website called losses to fall to the bubble. Basically, like how many losses can you take? And if you look at like Trine and Calvin, they're sitting there at 0. So like get to your conference tournament final and that can be your only loss, and then we might talk about you having a chance. Like if you take extra losses in there, just because they don't have the strength of schedule, there's like no margin for error. They have to have like a stellar winning percentage, or else we're just not going to have the conversation. All
I
right,
like it.
that's the bubble. Let's look back at last week's pick, Zach. This was a tremendous week. This week, I think we set a new high water mark for the D3 Datacast for picks. Just to go through last week, we had Alvernia plus 1.5 at Widener. We both took Widener. Alvernia won that game by 8. We both lose that one. Dubuque plus 3 at Nebraska Wesleyan. We went with Nebraska Wesleyan. Dubuque won on the road by 14. We both lose that one. Nichols plus 3.5 at Western New England. Nichols won that game by 2. That might have was that overtime, or was that just a close regular season, a regular
It was overtime.
overtime? Okay.
Yep.
So you win that, I lose that. So you're up by 1. RPI, the computer had them as 6-point dogs at Ithaca. Ithaca won that game by 11. We both missed that. And then the D3 Datacast game of the week was Swarthmore at Johns Hopkins, a game we failed to mention in our top 25 discussion, but Swarthmore was 7-point underdogs at Johns Hopkins, but Hopkins won by 10. We both missed that. So a grand total of 1 pick correct this last week, Zach. That was by you. You went 1-4. I went 0-5. You got to love going 1-4 and still making up a game.
That's right. I make up a game on you, survive in advance, baby.
So if you recall, way back when we started this process, we talked about how we expected that we would both kind of finish around 500 because the computer's making the lines. When you're picking against the spread, you figure you have a 50-50 chance of going either way. I started out strong, you started out not so strong, and then you've kind of almost caught all the way back up. I'm 2 games ahead, but we're both kind of straddling one on either side of that 500 mark. So we're kind of right where we thought we'd be. 4 weeks to go here in the regular season. How are you feeling right now, Zach?
I'm feeling good. I'm having a. It's been difficult for me to put together really good back-to-back weeks, but I feel like overall, over the last 4 or 5 weeks, I've been solidly ahead of you.
Yeah,
You've been struggling.
I have. Yeah, I won't make excuses, but my thought process into most of these games is, yeah, that looks good. I'll take that team. So we'll see. We'll see if I turn that around
Right.
this week.
When you flip a coin, you get 500 results.
All right, looking ahead at this week's picks, January 30 through February 5. Our first game is an Empire 8 Classic, probably the 2 top teams in that conference, both teams that were on our list for the Bubble Watch. Nazareth is 2-point favorites at Utica. Zach, who do you like in this one?
At Nazareth, I usually like a road dog or a home dog, but we went through the slides earlier. Both of these teams were mentioned. I think Nazareth is going to be in a little bit more desperation mode than Utica is at this time of year. So I'll take Naz.
Okay, I'm going to go against you on this one. I'm going to pick Utica. I think both these teams are fairly evenly matched, so I'm going to go with the home team, especially as the home dog, like you said. I'm going to go in that direction and take Utica. Next one, Albertus Magnus, 17.5-point underdogs at St. Joseph, Connecticut.
Yeah, I know you finally made the pick at the switch at the top of your ballot. You said it wasn't really anything that St. Joseph has done, but they have played some closer games than I think most people expected, especially in first halves, even though some final scores might look okay. But I feel like this whole time they've gotten into GNAC play, we've been talking about them potentially running the table, but it's always with but maybe Albertus Magnus. So I feel like at this time of the year, going through GNAC play, I think St. Joseph's been cruising a little bit, but we're at that. But maybe Albertus Magnus. So I think the focus comes back a little bit. Back at home, this is like the one team we thought maybe could kind of challenge them in GNAC play. I'm gonna go with St. Joseph.
Okay, so like they know this one's coming, so they've prepped for it.
Right,
Okay.
right. Whereas the other ones, there was cruise control. This is the one that's like this is the big conference game that really matters. Back, pedal to the metal. Let's go.
I'm worried about cruise control a little bit for St. Joseph too. They had maybe a wake up call against the Lasers, who almost got to them. So maybe they've learned the lesson without taking the loss. But 17.5 for me is just too big. I know St. Joseph's good enough to cover that, but Albertus could give them some trouble. we were kind of expecting maybe one loss, even though they're far and away better than the GNAC. But I think this one's tight. I expect this one to be maybe more like 10 or 12, not 17 and a half. Big matchup in the OAC. John Carroll's a pick'em at Heidelberg. Zach, your call.
The Blue Streaks are riding high after being re-included in your top 25. I'll take the Blue Streaks.
Yeah, this one's interesting to me. My computer has always been lower on John Carroll than have the human voters. It's one of the reasons why I've been a little bit lower is because both my efficiency ratings and the Massey ratings. I think John Carroll's a good team, but don't think they're an elite team. There's not that much difference between them and Heidelberg in a lot of these computer metrics. So a pick 'em, I'm going to go with the home team, and I'm going to say maybe Heidelberg steals one here. If you can consider it stealing, OAC is a tough league. Heidelberg's at home. No one would be completely shocked if they win, but that's where I'm going to make my pick. Big NJAC matchup: Montclair State, 1.5 point underdogs at Stockton. Zachary.
Yeah, this is a big one for who's going to be that main chase team behind Rowan. But just a 1.5 point line at home. I'll take Stockton.
Stockton, good call. I'm also going to go with Stockton for similar reasons. I think they're the better team. 1.5 at home. I think they can cover that. Although the flip side of that is maybe Montclair State needs this a little bit more for Pool C chances. Maybe they have more desperation mode. A win for them would be, I think, more huger than it would be for Stockton in that regard. But yeah, I'm going to go with Stockton here. And then our D3 Datacast game of the week this week is Emory at Wash U. You have to figure these two are maybe the main players in the UAA race right now. Maybe Wash U is the favorite. I don't know. They get the game at home, and Wash U is 4-point favorites. So how do you see this one, Zach?
I don't really know how I see this one, to be honest with you. I mean, this is okay. The UAA is making the turn here, so we're getting a repeat this upcoming weekend that we had last weekend. With Wash U just got the win at Emory. So I don't want to be fooled by that, but I think it's a big deal that they've got that win and they're coming back home for the rematch. Though I'm not sure how much like home court advantage has really been an advantage so far in UAA play. I mean, I think we've got a lot of good teams, and to be honest, I'm still not quite sure what to make of it. But I'll take Wash U at home.
Yeah, the UAA has been so weird for me, but I think it's because all the teams are good. All the teams are probably like top 100-ish teams, and so I think it's not really a surprise that anyone can win at any given week. I exit a UAA weekend thinking like Wash U is actually not good, and then the next week, like Wash U is actually the best team in the UAA, and maybe Emory's not good, and then like things will change next week. So I'm with you. I don't know how things are going to go. Obviously, all these teams are good, and you called me out on that like Wash U, Emory, Rochester portion of my ballot. So I think all these teams are pretty even. But being that even, I think this is going to be a good game. I think 4 points is about right. But Wash U I think looked good recently, so I'm going to go with Wash U and say that they can cover the 4 points at home. But I would not be surprised to see this game to be tight.
Yeah. I feel like Emory's the team of the contenders that so far has been flirting with disaster a little bit more than maybe some of the others, but that they've found a way to escape, and maybe that ran out just a little bit here this weekend against Wash U, but I don't know.
Yeah, I was watching I forget which game it was, but the Emory broadcaster said something to that remark about how they need like a cardiac cats equivalent for Emory because that's kind of how they've pulled things out most of the time. And yeah, eventually, you can't count on winning that way every week. But yeah, they've had some close games that they've won. They've suffered a couple of losses too, but yeah, they're a good team. Wash U's a good team.
5-2 in conference. Three of those 5 wins were overtime.
Yeah, jeez, yeah.
Overtime with Case, Brandeis, and Chicago.
Yeah.
So you could argue a couple of those. Maybe they shouldn't have even been going overtime. So anyway,
yeah. Again, I mean, a couple of those are the lower teams in the conference, but again, it's all good teams, so it's not like that embarrassing. Yeah, good league, strong league.
All right, we'll try to do better than one combined win. How about that?
Yeah, I mean, you almost just have to by like chance. I don't know. All right, mailbag. You got the first question for us, Zach?
I do. This comes from Tom C, who sent this in via Twitter. Tom says, I understand RRO plays a meaningful role in the tournament selection, but let's say your team has lost to what right now seems like a borderline ranked opponent. Do you want that team you lost to be ranked or not ranked at the end? In other words, is it better for that loss to be against an unranked opponent and not counted in your RRO, or is it always better for your loss to be against a perceived better team? This is a good question. I feel like this is something that always comes up and gets debated and talked about. So this is a good time to address this as we're, a week away from starting to see who actually is regionally ranked.
Yeah, I don't know the official answer to this question, to be honest. I'll give you my opinion or my perception of how the committee views it, but I feel free to correct me if you have sat on a committee before or you currently sit on a committee. My DMs are open.
If
Um,
not, and I do not.
okay, good. Um, my my perception is that regionally ranked wins are way more important than regionally ranked losses, and that regionally ranked losses probably don't actually hurt you. So what I mean is 0-0 versus regionally ranked opponents is not better than 0-2, and that 1-2 is probably better than 0-0. So I don't know if that officially answers the question. I would say it's probably neutral. Maybe it's better if it shows that you played a ranked team, but I don't know the answer to that. I don't think they really ding you for ranked losses. I think ranked games can only help you.
Yeah. So Matt, actually, to expand the conversation a little bit, um, I think kind of you get into some of the committee philosophy, right? And you have the different criteria, and you want to be careful not to use one of the criteria to double count. Like a lot of just games played against regionally ranked opponents likely shows up in your SOS number, right? So you don't want to give credit just for like games played um, in a way that would be kind of double counting strength of schedule, right?
Yeah.
And so in that vein, losses are going to show up in the decrease in winning percentage, right? So I think you kind of have to, or what the committee is tasked with is using the different primary criteria to kind of inform or maybe give context to others, but not to use it in a way that double counts or double jeopardizes something else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so regionally ranked wins are sort of a way to assess the quality of your wins in some regard.
Right,
Um, but it's more games played against regionally ranked teams just as a sign that you probably just played a better schedule, which is in your
right.
SOS.
Right. I always look at that as a way to help give context to a winning percentage number and a strength of schedule number. It's like we talked about St. Joseph a few times. They're going to have a very interesting resume and not the typical high winning percentage and marginal strength of schedule
Mhm.
number or resume that we see out of the GNAC because of the type of non-conference schedule they played. So even if their strength of schedule, having gone through all of GNAC play, takes a major hit and doesn't look that good, well, or looks just kind of like average, you look at that regionally ranked opponent number. If they've got, I don't know what, I don't remember what you had as for the projected, but let's say 5, 6, 7, whatever it is, it shows, yeah, they did actually play some really good teams.
Yeah,
And maybe they just played a bunch of really bad teams that kind of dragged it down, but they did play a lot of really good teams and they beat those teams
and
as
they got
well. So
wins
in
against
that,
them. Yeah,
right, right. And so that way it's kind of giving context to one strength of schedule number
yeah,
versus another.
yeah, yep. So I don't know. I think it probably doesn't matter.
I think you'd want it to be, yeah, maybe it doesn't matter, but it doesn't hurt.
It's probably better. Yeah, it might be.
It probably
Might
doesn't hurt.
it probably doesn't hurt. Probably doesn't hurt. Next mailbag question.
Next one this one comes from Twitter. Hilltopper asks if the D3 Datacast guys were making the call, would you prefer to keep the tournament in Fort Wayne for a while or move around every 2 to 3 years? Go ahead, Matt. You start us off on this
So
one.
of course, our very incredibly selfish answer is that we both live in different parts of Michigan, and Fort Wayne is very drivable for us. So from that regard, like Fort Wayne's awesome. Would love for it to stay in Fort Wayne.
It does specifically say if we were making the call.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, selfishly, due to proximity, it works great for us.
yeah.
Um, I would add, I think that it also is a pretty good location if you look at where typically, I don't want to say a lot of Final Four teams come from, but like look at last year. I think the fact that it was in Fort Wayne and not Salem, Virginia, really made that a better atmosphere than it otherwise would have been because you have
Wabash, Alberta.
Wabash being in the state. I think I looked it up earlier. I think it's about a 2.5 hour drive from campus to Fort Wayne. Elmhurst, 3 hour drive, and then from Marietta, I think was like 4.5. So anyway, you had three of the four schools that were very drivable, and then one that wasn't so drivable. I mean, I'm sure parents made the trek. It's like a 10-hour drive from
Yeah,
Randolph-Macon to Fort Wayne. But I feel like when it was in Salem, it was always the opposite, where it's like maybe one was really drivable, but then you had three teams that were coming from like, you know, an 8 to 10 hour drive away. So I think that worked out really well. Now, selfishly speaking, I would be okay with it shifting a little bit further east to maybe be a little bit more centrally located for the typical D3 footprint. From your side of the state, that doesn't necessarily help. But if, something like Cleveland or Columbus, Ohio, I think would be maybe a little bit more centrally located, and
yeah,
wouldn't impact me too much.
yeah. Yeah, I think just in general, moving around every 2 to 3 years feels like a lot of moving for me. I think at least like a 4 year cycle, put it in a place, let them learn how to run the championship, let people who are traveling kind of get familiar with the spot and then move it around. I don't know that I'd really actually want it to be in Fort Wayne forever, um, but a bid cycle or two, and then see who. I mean, I want these bids to be competitive too, because that hopefully improves the quality of the championship over time and improves the experience for the fans and the student athletes and everything. So I'm good in Fort Wayne for a little bit, and then we'll see what happens after that.
But right now, it's like the size of the arena is pretty good. Um, but it might
Yeah,
be better if we could stay downtown and walk to the arena as opposed
yeah,
to, drive out of
yeah,
the downtown area. So, I mean, it's not like it's a perfect scenario that they should never consider moving, but selfishly for us, it's great.
yep. It's very drivable, so it's nice. Yeah. All right, next question.
All right. Next question. This one came in via Twitter, asking to remain anonymous. It says, can Middlebury and St. Joseph both host second weekend NCAA tournament pods? Now, Matt, I think your initial reaction would be, no, that won't work, but you put in some
Yeah.
effort to figure out how it actually might.
Yeah, my first thought was they're both too far northeast, and we need stuff further west. But I think you can make it. I think you can make it work. So if your primary goal is that Middlebury and St. Joseph are two of the teams that like absolutely need to be protected above almost all else, then you can make it work. And I just kind of made one example. If you follow my Twitter on Saturday, I had made kind of a bracketology projection using just some numbers I had at the time, and using the host sites I had come up with, I made this bracket. So you could have a Randolph Macon sectional that consists of Randolph Macon's first round pod, the Claremont Mud Scripts kind of Southern California West Coast pod, Emory, and Christopher Newport. And you can probably make something work there. You could make St. Joseph host the Stockton pod, maybe the St. Thomas, Texas winner flies up there, and Rochester could head out there. Middlebury could host the Oswego State pod, the Swarthmore pod, and the Rowan pod. And then you could have kind of your Region 7, 8, 9 pods with Wheaton, John Carroll, Mount Union, and UW Oshkosh. So I think geographically, this one would work. You could make that happen. I think a couple things we see in this bracket that I kind of just laid out here is the sectional of Wheaton, John Carroll, Mount Union, and UW Oshkosh by the NCAA criteria is a very weak sectional. These would all be teams right now that would be at about the midway point or lower in like your hosts. So like if all the favorites got through, these would probably be like toward the bottom half, all in one sectional. The other thing is this is relying on two Region 10 hosts, which in my projection at the time had said maybe we would need two Region 10 hosts. It might get more difficult depending on who would be next in line and where the geography comes into play. If you have another team from a different part of the country, maybe it's not a big deal because maybe that's Keene State or something that can fill a pod, and then geographically that works as well. There's also, that one kind of 7, 8, 9 Wheaton pod that's really relying on Wheaton getting through to make the geography work. There's probably better pod arrangements because the way you stack up now, if Wheaton loses in that pod, maybe like Wash U is in there, maybe they beat Wheaton, then like you can't make the geography work between Wash U, Wisconsin, and the two Ohio schools within 500 miles. So that one geographically technically works for the favorites, but it's kind of, I feel like it's sitting on a knife edge. So I think, yes, I think there's some possibilities. It's really going to depend on how that works for like a balance of quality around the country. It really is going to depend on how many flights we have to have for like Region 10 pods and things to happen. But if if your top 3 seeds are Randolph, Macon, Middlebury, and St. Joseph, then maybe the committee is really invested in making it work. So I think, yes, technically possible. I think maybe not super likely. We could even see an arrangement where those are 2 of the top 3 teams seeding wise, but just based on geography, we kind of know that maybe the pods aren't going to end up there because they're kind of like Connecticut and Middlebury is like what, Vermont, so that's like it's pretty far northeast from the rest of the country. So like for instance, you actually can get Randolph Macon to St. Joseph if you were so inclined, but like you can't get Christopher Newport to St. Joseph. So there's like some limitations on how far down the East Coast you can get there. You can't get Mount Union or John Carroll out to Connecticut in 500 miles. So like it doesn't quite go west. So at this point, I'm thinking unlikely, but I'm thinking technically possible.
Yeah, so if you answer the question from a very specific viewpoint,
Yeah,
trying to make a very specific thing happen, yes, it's possible, but the likelihood of it actually turning out that way is probably very low.
yeah, yeah. But hey, I mean, if Middlebury and St. Joseph win out and they're like 2 of the very top seeds, maybe that's something that they want to make happen, and maybe that's important to protect those top seeds. So I wouldn't say no, but I wouldn't say yes either. Next question.
All right, we have a fourth mailbag question this week. Love it. And this was kind of just looking for you to expand some thoughts from Max Fan at Go Maccabees on Twitter. Would love to hear more from you on a tweet that you made in which you said, interesting to hear Mike Schauer, who was the outgoing, after last year's tournament, the chair of the men's national committee. He was wondering about whether we need some sort of nationalized criteria during an appearance on Hoopsville. And you said, I've been wondering if the regional ranking nature of D3 Hoops should change. I think the move to 10 regions reduced the amount of actual regionality.
Yeah, I don't know the exact context behind Mike Schauer's comment, other than he thought that there could be some sort of national criteria in the data, in the criteria as for the committee members. And winning percentage and strength of schedule is national now. Maybe 10 years ago it was more regional, but we still have that regionally ranked opponents criteria, which I'm guessing is what he was getting at. And that can vary region to region, and it can be maybe hard to compare. A team might have 3 regionally ranked wins and 3 regionally ranked wins, but you don't know that those are the same quality of wins unless you're having a comparison nationally. So one thing that my mind went to when thinking about that is like the committee had done the top 16 reveal, and we found out this past week they're going to do it again on an episode of, or on a special Hoopsville special, I guess, later on this year. So like, could they add something like wins versus top 16 or top 32 or something like that, where the committee's actually taking the regional rankings, doing a national top selection, and then having another criteria or a secondary criteria or a special like pool C selection criteria, I don't know, against that. So like that's just kind of where more mind goes to kind of contextualize the regionally ranked opponents, because I think wins versus regionally ranked opponents makes a lot of sense when you're doing your own regional ranking, because you can figure those are against teams that are geographically similar for all those teams involved. So that's fine. The second part of my tweet, which is about like the regional nature of Division III changing, is just looking at the Division III map. We've split region, what used to be the Northeast region, into 2 regions, and the footprints of those 2 regions now are pretty much like on top of each other. So we just kind of split the region into two, and it's not really different geographically. It's just different administratively, I guess. I think it's similar for Region 4 and 5. They're kind of right on top of each other as well, and one's like maybe slightly more north, and one's a little bit slightly more south, but like not really all that much. So we're kind of just splitting up regions into even numbers of teams rather than straight geography. Even when you get into like regions 8 and 9 in like the Illinois, Wisconsin area, there's quite a bit of overlap, and Ohio and Indiana overlaps in regions 8 and 7. Um, and there's always been that overlap, but I think geographically, are we losing something with the move to 10 regions where we're spreading things out and making things more even with numbers? Have we lost that connection to the real regionality of the thing? And should we not be thinking about regional rankings anymore? Should we be doing some sort of more national rankings? And I don't have a solution or really a more well thought out like answer to this. It just gets more. I mean, if you did, instead of regional rankings for 10 regions, if you just did a national top 100, then like how do you split that up for the committee? Is it like one committee ranking 100 teams every week, and that's like a lot? So I don't know exactly what to do, but maybe something between. It'd be maybe interesting to hear from Mike if he was ever like in a position where he wanted to expand on those thoughts or like come up with new criteria, what he would think as helpful as a person in those discussions and leading those discussions when it came down to comparing teams nationally to each other, and what maybe the difficulties are and what maybe a potential solution is. Um, and I don't know that we need to go away from the regional model of like regional rankings. I don't want to go more towards a Division II model where like literal pool bids are allocated per region. I don't think that's the right way to go necessarily. But um, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, one of the lessons that came out of last year, or one of the messages, was just that they're ranking too many teams, right? And so we've seen the adjustment this year. I feel like this year, the lesson to me has been there's too many regions. Like the number of teams being ranked was corrected and maybe feels right now, but across 10 regions just doesn't feel right. And like you mentioned, with the footprint of region 1 and 2 being indistinguishable.
Yeah,
And then we've also started doing a little bit of playing around with some, comparing the NCAA strength of schedule metric to some other computer-based strength of schedule metrics. And we find that there's some pretty big problems with that as an actual strength of schedule, because
yeah,
it can be skewed by region, and especially with like a region 1, where you've got the big dog NESCAC and and a bunch of other, or well, not a bunch, but what, 3 other conferences that compared to the landscape of D3 are bottom quartile conferences. Well, those teams are all playing, mostly games against each other and playing conference games. So you might come out with a record of 500 or better, but when you actually do some sort of like computer-based ranking
yeah,
system, it's not really a good team. But when you do like a NCAA type strength of schedule calculation, it's like, oh, it's a 600 winning percentage team. Well, that's a problem when you're comparing a Region 1 strength of schedule to a Region 9 strength of schedule. So it would be nice if there was some way that they could kind of level that out. And so I don't know if in the future we'll put something together that presents some of this information, but it's become
yeah,
apparent to me that there's a real problem. Like it's fine if you're dealing with within a region, you're using the criteria to rank within that region. Like I think it works fine as a regional ranking. But when we're doing Pool C selections and you've got one team from each region across the board, and you're using that same data to pick who's in, who's not in, comparing those teams kind of like as if it was apples to apples
yeah.
comparisons. Well, to me, I don't think that the SOS numbers actually are apples to apples comparisons.
Anyway, that's probably enough on that for now. But I don't have any firm thoughts on this whole thing except for I just was wondering. I've is 10 regions not the right model right now? I don't know. Maybe it is the right model. I'm not saying it's
And the
not.
other problem, I don't know exactly where all the distinctions lie, but in some of this you get into, this is not just a basketball problem, but you get
Mhm.
into if things are going to change, they need to change across the board. And sometimes individual sports have some leeway to do things differently, whereas other things need to be implemented across the board. So
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
knows?
It can get complicated with governance and legislation and all that too. So anyway, that's the end. That's the end of the mailbag. It's probably the end of the show. You have anything more to say, Zach?
Nothing more.
Like we said, one more week, then we're getting into regional ranking time. This is the time of the year I'm updating my spreadsheets every day. I should have an update in the morning, just about every day. So glad to see the data, glad to use the data. I'm glad other people have seemed to enjoy it. We'll be coming out with D3 Datacast episodes every Monday going forward. We'll be probably doing regional ranking predictions and discussion for most of those. If you have specific questions regarding the regions, hit our mailbag up. We can answer some of those. I think that's been fun to see is the interaction, of course. That's why we do this. Yeah, I think that's it.
Links for the regional ranking data will be available in the description down below. And you can connect with us on Twitter at D3Datacast and Facebook, facebook.com/D3Datacast. We'll see you next week.
Good job, team.